Hey everyone, welcome to Amanda's Book Corner. I'm Amanda, and this is part 2 of my May wrap-up. In this video, I'll talk about the 3 books I read that were for my May reading challenge, which was to read books set in Spain. And if you want to go back and see my other video, which was all the other 7 books I read in May, which were not set in Spain, I'll link to that right here. So of the total 10 books I read in May, 3 of them were in Spain, so let's get to them. Actually, before I talk about the 3 books I read, I want to talk about 2 books that I started and DNF'd almost right away. So the first one I was planning to read was Remember Me by Mario Escobar. This is actually a Spanish author and translated from Spanish, and I read the first 30 or 35 pages, and although I liked it, I just wasn't really feeling it for some reason. So I decided that I didn't really feel like reading it right now, but I think I will get to it later on. It seems like a good book, I just wasn't in the right mood for it. So I stopped it after a few chapters. The other book I DNF'd was A Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. This is also a Spanish author, and I've actually been really excited to read this book for a while. I've heard great things about it. I've also heard not so great things about it, and I'm afraid I might fall into that latter camp. I read the first 2 or 3 pages, and I was not feeling it at all. It kind of annoyed me. So I might get back and read this later, but I might never read it. We'll see. We'll figure it out. But I was not in the mood for this at all, and it frustrated me in the first few pages. So I'm not sure this one I'll get back to, but I did DNF it almost immediately. Alright, so let's talk about the books I actually finished and mostly enjoyed. So the first Spain book I actually finished was The Snow Gypsy by Lindsay Jane Ashford. I've had this book for a few years. It came out in 2019 and I probably got it around then. And it's been on my shelf and I've been very excited to read it. I will admit that I'm in America, and so I don't really know the history of the term gypsy, but I didn't realize until after I bought the book that it's actually kind of an offensive term, and so I'm going to avoid using that for the rest of this video, but it was something that now, in 2022, going into reading this, I was a little bit not sure how the book would go, considering the use of the word in the title, and as it turns out, throughout the whole entire book. This book is set in May and June in 1946, just a year after World War II has ended, and it follows Rose, who is searching for her missing brother. Her brother went down to Spain 8 years prior to this, and he was fighting alongside Romani people, but then he disappeared, and she hasn't heard from him in 8 years. Her dad had actually gone looking for him a few years prior to this, but her dad died. Her mom has also since died, so there's been a lot of death in her family. But now that the war is over and it's safe to travel again, she wants to go down to Spain and see if she can figure out what happened to her brother. She holds out some hope that he's alive, but there's also a very good chance that he's not. Alongside this, there's a young woman named Lola who lives in Andalusia in the southern part of Spain. She's a flamenco dancer, and 8 years ago she adopted a baby that she found in the mountains that would have died if it hadn't been for her. She lost most of her family and lives with her cousin, who is the flamenco guitarist, and there's a chance that she might be able to help Rose in looking for her brother and the lost life he left behind. So Lola and her daughter Nieve and her cousin Cristobal, they're all Romani people living in southern Spain. They end up going to an event in southern France, and that's where Rose meets them. Rose figures that Romani people were the last people to see him, and so maybe they can be the ones to help her find her brother. Rose quickly develops a bond with Lola, Nieve, and Cristobal, so she ends up traveling down south into Spain with them, and Lola is able to at least point her in the direction of the town where her brother was last seen. So I don't want to say too much more than that, but I will say that I kind of did and didn't like this book. On the one hand, I think that the way the author wrote this book felt a little bit too much like she was leading us on. It kind of felt like she was trying to give us the answers before she was supposed to, and building up expectations in us, and just kind of taking away the surprise that could have been there. Not that she was actually always teasing the real outcome of what happened, but it did just feel like she was leading us on a lot, and it kind of bothered me. I felt like she was laying it on too thick sometimes, but then she would pull the rug out from under you, and I'd be like, okay, well, why did you hint at this thing so much? It did kind of bother me. Rose is kind of an odd main character as well. She's a little bit bland. She's kind of strong, but also kind of wishy-washy and complicated. I didn't particularly like her character development, and I didn't like that she kept making the same kinds of mistakes, especially in regards to her love life. It just felt annoying. And honestly, in regard to the second relationship that she had, I did not like how that worked out. I didn't think the final reveal was necessary, and it just bothered me a lot, honestly. It's like, just let this girl have her happiness. Like, why is it so hard to find a good guy? I like Lola and Nieve a lot more. I think they're more interesting characters, and I would have liked to spend more time with them as opposed to with Rose. Now back to that first thing I mentioned about the word gypsy in the title. This was something I was a little bit wary of when I went into the book. The author uses that word extensively throughout the book, so if that's a word that does offend you or make you feel uncomfortable, I would maybe recommend skipping this book. Now, beyond that, I do think the author treats the Romani people with respect and sensitivity here. I do think she's trying to show them positively and shed a light on a lot of the horrors that they have faced. They faced a lot of atrocities during World War II. It wasn't just Jewish people, it was also Romani people as well who were targeted. She also sheds a lot of light on another issue that was happening during Franco's regime of Spain. I don't want to say too much about that because it is kind of a spoiler, but it is another issue that takes center stage here. So apart from the language, I do think the book is meant to be positive towards Romani people, and I did appreciate that. I did enjoy getting to know Spain through the perspective of Romani people and with a focus on them, but overall this book kind of felt a little bit hit and miss for me. A lot of things were anticlimactic for me, and it didn't always hold my attention, although it was interesting too. So in the end, I gave it a solid 3 stars. The next Spain book I read is The Fountains of Silence by Ruta Sepetys. This is another book I've had on my shelf since 2019, and actually one of my personal reading goals for this year is to finish all the 2019 Book of the Month books I have on my shelf. There were 7 of them, and I've gotten through I think 2 or 3 now. So this one, as you can see, is a Book of the Month edition. I've also since gotten 2 more books by this author, so I was really hoping I'd like this one because I never read her before, and now that I have 3 books by her, I really do hope I'm putting my money in the right place. So this book is set in 1957 in Madrid, and this is during Franco's regime, so about 20 years after the Spanish Civil War. And although it's been 2 decades, many of the people in Spain are still living in fear and in secrecy, and it is a really bleak time for them. The book focuses on Daniel, who is from Texas, and although he's an American, his mother is Spanish, and so he does have some connections to the country, and he speaks Spanish fluently. He's staying at a hotel in Madrid, and this is how he meets a girl named Ana. Ana is around his age, maybe a bit older than him, and she lives with her older brother and older sister. Their parents died during the Civil War. They were on the opposing side of Franco, and so her family is not treated very well and have to live in secrecy because of the opposing side that they were on during that war. Daniel wants to get to know Ana better, but she's very secretive and she's being threatened by someone. Meanwhile, he's a photographer and he's taking pictures and trying to uncover some of the secrets that are looming over Spain at this time. So going into this book, I did at first think it might be kind of weird to read a book that was focusing on a guy from Texas as opposed to a Spanish person. It's not that Daniel is the only main character here. There are other characters that also get their own chapters as well, but he is kind of the main character. And going in, I wasn't sure about that, but actually, as I read it, it made a lot more sense that they had an outsider looking in as the main perspective. A lot of that is because in Spain at this time, there was so much secrecy and so much that was left unsaid, and Spaniards there, of course, are very well of what was going on in Franco and the hauntings of the past of the Civil War. So for the reader to really get a good idea of what was going on with Spain, it made sense to look at it through the perspective of someone who didn't really understand what was happening and why people acted and hid themselves the way that they did. So despite my initial reservations, I do think that the author made the right choice in making the book primarily focused from the perspective of an outsider. I like the way the story unfolded and how we got to have really short chapters, each focused on a different character. Sometimes we followed Daniel, sometimes we followed Ana, sometimes it was her brother Rafa or her cousin Puri. So there was a lot of different colors and perspectives woven throughout. Although the way it's written, it's kind of almost like a mystery. You're not entirely sure what's going on, and a lot of things are left unsaid, even in the chapters focused on the characters that know things that they're not letting on. And although this book is almost 500 pages long, which is a little bit intimidating if you're like me and you're not a fast reader, I will say that this book was a very quick read. The chapters are very short, and the way it's written is just very engaging and lightning fast, and so the pages went by really fast for me. Like I said, this book is all about secrets, and there's some dark things that come up in this book. I won't say what because there are some spoilers, although I will say that one of the kind of darker things that is eventually revealed happens to be a very similar, basically the same issue that was in the previous book I mentioned, the Snow Gypsy. So I'm not going to say what that was. I didn't say it for the other book, I won't say it for this one, but they both happen to have a similar theme going on. In the previous book, it focused on what was happening with Romani people. In this book, it focuses on what was happening with people who were supporters of the opposing side during the Spanish Civil War, the side that lost to Franco, unfortunately. Now, I have said in videos in the past year that I'm kind of starting to move away from YA books. Not always, but in some ways I am. Ruta Sepetys is known as being a YA author, although I think that reading this book you can see that she really is indeed a crossover author, which she's also known to be. This book, although it kind of is YA, in that the characters are mostly in their late teens or early 20s, it definitely could work for an adult audience, and it didn't really feel YA to me. It didn't seem like it was too simplistic or ever shied away from anything. It shows things in a very adult way, even if it's understandable enough for a younger audience. Also, later on in the book, it does jump forward in time several years, so again, that makes it feel more adult rather than YA to me. One final thing I want to say is I really like that between the chapters, there are little bits of historical documents and conversations in here. These really add to the book and add to the understanding of what was going on in Spain, what was happening with Franco's regime, and how Spaniards and outsiders, especially Americans, viewed what was happening in Spain. So that really added a lot to the historical context of the book. So I thought this was an excellent book, and I will say that the way it ends completely opens up a path for potentially a sequel. I don't think a sequel is planned yet, but if the author ever changes her mind, I think there are people that would like a sequel, me being one of them. So overall, I thought this was great, and I give it 4.5 stars. The final book I read is a memoir called North to Paradise by Osman Umar. The book was originally published in Spanish as Viaje al País de los Blancos, which translates to Journey to the Land of the Whites. And that descriptor of Europe, Land of the Whites, does come up a lot throughout the book. The author's memoir starts off in Ghana when he was a young boy, and it describes what it was like growing up in his village and how he was working from a very, very young age. Eventually, he decided to leave and find more opportunities by traveling north. He traveled north through Niger to get to Libya, and he spent a lot of time there before eventually journeying farther west and ultimately getting all the way to Spain. His memoir is written in a rather simplistic and straightforward way, and it doesn't always go into detail about certain things, but despite that, I thought it was a fascinating story, and I really felt for the author as he described his journey, especially because he was so young. He was really just a child, maybe a teenager during most of this. It's really scary how he described spending many weeks in the Sahara Desert and how many people on the journey with him did die because of the heat and because of thirst, and how he eventually made his way into Libya. And even there, although he spent some time there, he faced a lot of struggles and was exploited by people and tricked by people who maybe wanted to do some bad things. I do appreciate how he talks about how, although it was really bad for him, he saw that it was so much worse for other people. And it does shed a light on how girls and women especially were more vulnerable to terrible things and being forced into prostitution. So I thought that was really interesting, and I mean, it was horrific, of course, but I do appreciate that he sheds a light on that. He also talks about being cheated out of money and people lying to him, and how it's just a very dangerous situation when you're a migrant and there's all these people that are looking to make money off of you and potentially leave you to die in the process. Although most of this journey does take place in Africa, he eventually does make it to Spain. Upon arriving in Spain, they ask him how old he is, and I thought this was really interesting that he had no idea what his actual age was. Apparently where he's from in Ghana, they don't keep track of birthdays, and so he doesn't know what year he was born. All he knew was that he was born on a Tuesday, which is not that helpful. But based on their medical examinations of him, they determined that he was 17, and because he was underage, under 18, they allowed him to stay. I thought it was also fascinating how he had put all this time and effort into going to the Land of the Whites, and he didn't really know anything about it. He didn't know that Spain was even a country. And when they got there and they asked him what city he wanted to go to, he knew soccer, so he said Barca, and so they said, okay, Barcelona, we're sending you to Barcelona. Here's a sandwich and a few euros, and go make your life. Now, despite all of the hardships he faced during his journey in Africa, being in Barcelona wasn't just easy peasy as soon as he got there. He definitely did struggle, and I really felt bad for him, but I also felt so happy about the nice connections he made with people there. And I don't want to spoil it, but I will say that towards the end I cried. I cried from happiness or from just my faith in humanity being restored by some people that he met. So his story is really fascinating, and I love that now that he lives in Spain and has secured a good life for himself, he's paying it forward and he's trying to help others in Ghana, and how he's committed to educating people there because education is so important. and so I just thought it was a really fascinating and inspiring story. I gave North to Paradise 5 stars. So I only read 3 books set in Spain for my reading challenge. I wanted to read at least 4 or 5, but because of other books that came up that were mostly obligations that I had to fulfill, I ended up only reading a few. I still have a ton of Spain books on my shelves though, so I might have to do another Spain reading challenge sometime in the future. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. And to make sure you don't miss any more of my videos, please ring the bell to get all my notifications. Currently I'm putting out about 1 video per week, but I'm going to try to bump it up to 2 videos per week in the near future. I do wrap-ups like this one, and listicles, and vlogs, so there's a lot going on. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!